Oh, there we go.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to join Lindsay in welcoming you all to Recovery Jam. My name is Melissa C. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. I'm in the state of New York, and I'm really happy to be here tonight. Love when I get to see like new people and old people that are new again and and people that I haven't seen in a while. So I'm just really happy to be here. And I a really quick qualification for those of you that are new. I say I've recovered from compulsive overeating. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. And, just to give you like a little background on me, I had suffered with this disease all my life. I just was always in battle with the food and my weight and my food and my weight. And it was like it was it was the biggest topic of my life. It was the thing that was in the room with me at all times. I had a different reaction, a different relationship to food than my counterparts, than the people around me did. And whether I was thinner, because there's been times, right, when I would be at a thin body weight, times when I would be morbidly obese. It didn't matter. The food was always present in my mind. I was either trying to control it, trying to manage it, or I was out of control and decided that I didn't care anyway, right? And there was never an in between period. I never maintained a normal, healthy body weight for any length of time. I was either dieting or I was regaining and waiting to get back on the diet again. And I've been relieved of that. It's been 11 years, almost 11 years since I have become entirely abstinent. I've been relieved of over 160 pounds, and I don't diet, and I'm not in battle with the food, and I'm not in battle with my weight. It's in fact, I shared with someone today that nobody has commented on my weight in years. Like, it used to be like, oh my God, you're losing so much weight. Look at you. It's a non-topic. The people in my life who know me, they never comment about it anymore. They don't, one way or the other. And and so now I have to get on with the business of living, right? Because my weight and my food is really, it was just a symptom. It was just a symptom of a much greater problem. And I'm really how that happened for me, how is it that I've recovered, is it's by God's grace and mercy. It is not by me alone. The topic for tonight is willingness, and willingness is indispensable. That's really what it is. We've emphasized willingness is indispensable, and that was my entry point because I became willing to say, I don't know how I'm going to do this on my own, and I became willing to chase the possibility of a miracle, and that's what this program is. This is a program for people who require a miracle. I needed a miraculous intervention. I needed God to get in between me and the food. And in order for God to get in between me and the food, I had to be willing to invite God to get in between me and the food. So I'm going to talk about willingness tonight, and that right in the big book, Into Action, on page 76. This is the line. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. So, what does indispensable mean? Right? What does that mean if this is what willingness is? Well, absolutely necessary, essential, crucial, necessary, key, vital, needed, and required. That's what indispensable means. And um, so I have to be inclined or favorably disposed in mind, ready, prepared mentally or physically for some experience or action, prepared for immediate use. That's what willing is, like willing, favorably inclined. To promptly act or respond. That's what willing is also. Done or accepted by choice or without reluctance, like just to be willing, right? And of or relating to the will or power of choosing. So, we are powerless, but I also have willingness. Those are two different things, right? I might not have power, but I certainly have a willingness, right? And in the big book, Appendix in the Spiritual Experience on page 568, it says this: willingness, honesty, and open mindedness are the essentials of recovery. So it's absolutely necessary. It's extremely important. It's crucial. It's necessary. It's key. It's vital. It's needed. And it's required. Nothing can happen until you're willing, until you come to a spot where you have this sense of willingness. So when I was out there, eating and not willing, nothing was going to happen. I did not have a miraculous intervention when I wasn't willing to seek a miraculous intervention. So what makes us willing then, right? How is it that we can become willing? Well, I think willingness is made up of two parts. One part desperation, right? One component is desperation, feeling like you've got no other options and having, you know, I say like willingness is like 100 parts desperation. It's like I've tried everything over and over and over again. I am at my wit's end. There's nothing else I can do. I don't know what to do. I'm out of ideas. I'm desperate. And then the other really important component that makes us willing is we have to have a little bit of hope. Because desperation alone, I'll just be laying in bed. I'll never do anything. Willingness means that there's a little bit of hope there, that I have this thought that maybe, just maybe, something better can happen for me, that there is a miracle for me. And I would say that anybody who ever picks up the phone and calls a stranger probably has some willingness, must have some hope, because otherwise, why would you pick up the phone and call that stranger? Even coming to a meeting right now, you could be like eating, but there must be some idea in your head somewhere or in your heart somewhere that something could change for you. That's called hope. And that's an important component that can make up willingness. In the big book, in the forward to the second edition on page XVI, it says this: but when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. So, knowing that this is a hopeless malady can actually encourage people to be more willing to take action. Right? And in Bill's story on page 12, it says, upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. So his friend being Ebby. And we know that when Ebby showed up, Bill was drinking. Bill was actually drinking. But what gave Bill hope was Ebby was not. And Ebby looked happy. And Ebby looked healthy. And Ebby looked well. And that gave Bill hope. So this is important information for us as we go out and try to carry the message. We must first use our words to drive home the hopelessness of this disease. Do not cheer people up. Don't give them false hope. You don't say to somebody when they come to a meeting, oh, now you're going to be better. Now that you're here, yes, everything's going to turn around for you. That's false hope, right? So, first, we drive home the hopelessness, the hopeless feature of this disease, which is part of the directions in the chapter Working with Others. We emphasize this so that the sufferers begin to see that this is something that they can't battle on their own, can't do it on your own. But the other important thing for us to keep in mind is that we show up like Ebby, right? Willing to talk to people, even if they're still using the substance. That we don't treat people, as though they're bad because they're eating, right? Ebby did not treat Bill like he was a petulant child. He actually talked to him. He actually came and delivered the message, offered him hope. He even spoke about God. Bill was drinking, and Ebby talked about God with him. So our words should help create desperation, but our deportment and our demeanor should bring hope, right? Evie talked about desperation, but he looked well, and that brought hope. And I've heard, people sometimes make light with this idea of praying for willingness. Like, I remember at one time rolling my eyes at someone who said, "Well, I'm just praying for willingness." And, I thought that was just a silly way of saying that I don't really want to take action. And I may have cast judgment on that person. But in the chapter Into Action on page 76, it says this: if we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. Well, when I ask God, what does that mean? That means I'm praying. So you can actually pray for willingness, right? There, they're talking about defects. They're referring to the defects and that the prayer that God can remove them. But I want to say that the greatest defect I ever had that might be keeping me, that might have kept me from making a start, that might be keeping other people from making a start, could be fear. Sometimes people come in here and their biggest problem is that they're afraid. There's fear and there's this sense of selfishness, right? This all wrapped up in themselves. And both of those qualities are certainly worthy of prayer, right? We can certainly pray. So praying for the willingness to make a start is actually nothing to roll my eyes at after all. Like, I think I was wrong when I rolled my eyes at that. So willing to do what, right? So if I'm going to have to be willing, and we talk about willingness, and this is indispensable, and you can't do without it, what are you going to do with this willingness? What is it that you need willingness to do? Willingness to do what? Because action, we're always told, right? Action is required. That if I don't take action, my willingness has no teeth. It has no value. It means nothing. So I need to be willing to do certain things. What is it that I'm going to need to do? Well, in Bill's story on page 13, it says this: belief in the power of God plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. So if you're willing to establish the new order of things and then maintain this new order, right? That's what they're talking about. Okay, what does that even mean? What do you mean, this new order, right? What is an order? It's the arrangement or disposition of people or things in relation to each other according to a particular sequence, pattern, or method. Okay, sequence meaning steps, right? Method meaning the 12 steps. So, and it's also, order can also mean an authoritative command, direction, or instruction. So, willingness to follow directions and instructions, to follow the sequence, to follow the steps. So, we have to be entirely willing to establish a new arrangement and a new structure in our lives. And what I say was like, I always use this, and sort of example, this kidding around, but I wanted OA light, which means I wanted a fit OA around my life. I had my life, that was my order, that was my structure, and show me how to fit this OA thing in there. That's not willingness. That's very different. Recovery does not mean that I merely fit my recovery into my well established, structured life. but it does mean that I'm going to be participating and cooperating in the creation of a new structure. That I'm to say, I am willing to say that what I was doing before is not a structure that I'm necessarily going to maintain, but I keep myself widely open to the understanding that this structure will have to be rebuilt, that I'm going to have a new structure of my life. Um, and the other definition of order means a command or direction, not just a structure, but a command or direction. And isn't that just what this is all about? A new director. Who's going to be my new director? Well, we know that that's God. We have to have a willingness to not try to play God, right? To allow another director into the driver's seat. So I think it's important for us then to take a look at how we apply willingness to each of the steps, because that's the structure, right? That's the sequence that we're following. And then how does willingness relate to each step? If it's essential, if it's indispensable, how do I practice it in all my steps? Well, step one, willingness. In the 12 and 12 in step one on page 24, it says this: under the lash of alcoholism, we are driven to AA, in my case, OA, and there we discover the fatal nature of our situation. Then and only then do we become as open minded to conviction and as willing to listen as the dying can be. We stand ready to do anything which will lift the merciless obsession from us. So I need to be open minded to conviction, right? And, a conviction was my firmly held beliefs or opinions. I need to be willing to entertain new beliefs and new opinions, to set aside, and that was perfect opening prayer, Jen, without us even talking about it. Perfect opening prayer. We have to set aside our old convictions and be willing to seek a new one. You have to be willing to follow directions in order to get well. I used to say this, like, there's a part in there about, we need to be rescued, right? And that in order to be rescued, you have to be willing to put the life jacket on. And I had to stop saying, oh, I don't like that life jacket. I really would rather have this one, the one that, goes over my head and doesn't have to, be strapped in between the legs. Mm-mm. If you are desperate, if you are willing, you take whatever life jacket that's thrown your way. If you believe that the person who's throwing it has been rescued themselves, has the capacity and the ability to help with your rescuing, then you put the life jacket on, right? And you stop struggling. In how it works on page 58, it says this: if you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And actually, we say this: then and only then. Then and only then. If you are not willing, there's no point in doing these steps. They won't work. You've got to be willing to go to any length. So, step one requires that a decision that you want what others have and are willing to not stay on the sidelines, merely watching others recover and live their recovered lives, but actually do what those people are doing, to participate. I often say, and I know someone had said here earlier that they couldn't put their camera on, so I'm not calling you out. I'm just saying, normally what I tell people who are willing, right? Put your camera on. Like, if you're newly coming in and you want help, I always tell newcomers and people that I'm trying to help, put your camera on. We can't help you if we don't see you, right? If you're just a box with a name, you're really not at a meeting. I like to say you're at the recovery show. It's sort of like you're watching Netflix, but it's the recovery version. You're not really there, right? Now, this is a workshop, so the ability to participate is sort of confined to within the chat box, really, right? Or or just giving service when needed. But if you are at a meeting and you are willing to actually participate in the meeting, that means you raise your hand. If you're on a phone meeting, you press star one and you share when given the ability to. That you actually participate. You're all in. You know, we say like this: if you were at a face-to-face meeting, you would not be in the hallway with your ear pressed against the door. You'd actually open up the door, step inside, and take your seat. Right. So, and there's a solution on page 25 to 26. It says this we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. What is it that we did? We decided that we were going to seek a spiritual solution. That at that point, it's like we had two choices.
On the bottom.
One, go to the bitter end, blotting out, right? The consciousness of this intolerable situation as best you could. Basically, eat yourself to a food coma, right? So you're not even aware that you're alive, or accept spiritual help. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. So, willingness means that there's efforting. There is efforting. Now, good news, when you recover, the efforting you do is not about keeping you abstinent, right? That's not, when I say I've been relieved of the desire to eat compulsively, I mean it. Food really doesn't call my name anymore. It's miraculous. But there's efforting involved in the work of the steps, right? So it's understood that willingness means ready to work hard and exert all your effort, exert all your human power. Step two, so that's step one, right? Step two, willing to believe. That's what you need willingness for in step two, a willingness to believe. In the big book, in We Agnostics, on page 46, it says this: we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. So, step two means that we're willing to believe that which we cannot define or understand. Step two does not mean that I have a solid description ready to go about exactly what God is. It does not mean that I know precisely who God is and what God's plan is, but that I'm willing to believe, regardless of if I understand it or not. And, I've heard one time at a meeting that a fellow said that she doesn't have to understand God, but she does have to stand under him. And I thought that explains it perfectly. So oftentimes, and I want to kind of answer this, well, I'm going to continue and then I'll come back to it. In Bill's story on page 12, it says this: it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself, right? Matter to willing. And in We Agnostics on page 47, it asks, do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? And as soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. So, what is the difference between believing and willing to believe, right? What does that mean? One is you believe and the other one is you're willing. Well, willing to me means that there might be some uncertainty still, not 100% sold. Willing means that I may have doubts, I may have misgivings, but you're open to the possibility. And then to go even further, to live by spiritual principles, to live by principles which leads us into a willingness to have a relationship with God, a personal, intimate connection to invite God in. So when people say, what if someone doesn't believe, right? What if someone comes to you? And I've had that happen. Someone will say to me, Melissa, I don't know, I don't believe. The question that I ask them that I think is the essential question is, do you want to? Do you want to believe? Because if you don't want to believe, I can't help you. Because remember, we have two choices. One is to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of this intolerable situation as best we can. And the other one is to accept spiritual help. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. And I would say if somebody doesn't want to believe, they probably haven't taken step one. Because step one is a painful pummeling, right? It's being beaten into reasonableness. It is actually reasonable to want to believe in God if you're bloody and bruised from this disease. If you cannot find your way out, it's reasonable to want a power greater than yourself, right? So in Bill's story on page 12, it says, there had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. And then there's a solution on page 28. It says, if what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, creed, or color, are the children of a living creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. So we do this, you know, by holding space in our hearts and in our day. That's what I think. What does it mean? How do you take action? What does it look like if you're honestly willing to make the effort, willing enough and honest enough to try? Well, it means that you start right away with prayer and meditation, whether you believe it or not, because you're going to want to. You're going to want the relief. In practical terms, for many of us, it's a willingness to get up earlier, right? For me, it meant like get out of bed earlier and start these practices, start these spiritual practices. It's an action that we're open and willing to practice repeatedly and to try it honestly. All right. So, step 3, willing to turn our lives over to the care and protection of God. So now we've taken step 1, we've taken step 2, both of which are built upon a foundation of willingness. And now it's step 3, which requires more willingness. In the big book, Working with Others, on page 93, it says this: the main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself and to live by spiritual principles. And in A Vision for You, on page 158, it says this: on the third day, the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his creator. He took a third step and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary and willing to depend upon a higher power. In the 12 and 12, in the AA 12 and 12, step 3 says this on page 36. And the facts seem to be these: the more we became willing to depend upon a higher power, the more independent we actually are. Right? So it's essential. We have to be willing to become dependent on our higher power. And on page 16, how it works, the point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. So the willingness of step 3 means that we go from belief to reliance. The more we depend on God, the freer we become. We stop forcing life and its people to conform to our design. Rather, we seek God's design. We become willing to give God our thoughts, our actions, our hearts, our very lives. And in fact, it's so that we can show others, right, how powerful and wonderful God is. So I'm willing. Step three means I'm willing to be on Team God. Like that's the team I'm going to join. I'm going to join God's team to make my life all about now being a good agent for God, being a good representative of God, that I am willing to make God my employer, that I'm willing not to make God my agent. I don't, I used to think it was I tell God my will for him and I ask him to have the power to carry that out. That's not it. Instead, step three is I ask God to inform me of what his will is for me. Tell me my assignment and give me the power so that I can do your assignment. Right. And, and so my life now is really supposed to be, if you're willing, all about being a really good PR person for God, for your higher power. And this is through my actions, not just my words. My words are meaningless unless I take the required actions to live to grow along spiritual lines. I'm willing to grow and grow in this way. All right, so what's the willingness of step four then? Well, in the 12 and 12, step four says this on page 50. Now willing to commence the search for his own defects, he will ask, just how do I go about this? How do I take inventory of myself? So we need to be willing, right, to begin the inventory process. We are called to search out our defects. Notice it says search. So I'm willing to look really hard at what's wrong with me. Like willingness to really self-examine me. And on page 52, in step four in the 12 and 12, it says, if I am unable to change the present state of affairs, am I willing to take the measures necessary to shape my life to conditions as they are? So step four also means that we be willing to accept current situations. And instead of trying to get the present circumstances to change, we have to be willing to do the changing ourselves. Remember how anger, we're told, is the dubious luxury of normal men, and how argument and fault finding are to be avoided like the plague. So now I become willing to do what? To walk away from the fight. Perhaps even risk being seen as a coward, as a weakling, or as a pushover, right? Which was a fear of mine. I don't want them to think that I'm a doormat, you know? But I actually had to be willing to do that so that I would not harbor my resentments, so I would not keep them safe. I had to be willing to say, I'm not fighting this. This is not the bridge I want to die on. Step five. What is it with step five? Willing to be entirely honest with someone and willing to take advice and accept, right? And the 12 and 12, step five says this on page 59. Only by discussing ourselves, holding back nothing, only by being willing to take advice and accept direction could we set foot on the road to straight thinking, solid honesty, and genuine humility. So we're told if you want to be able to think straight, act honestly, and have true humility, you're going to have to accept directions. You're going to have to be willing to accept directions from other people. It says though in step five, I want to say that we do this with someone who understands and is unaffected. So, the person that we're going to get this solid advice from understands what it is we're driving at, which is a relationship with God. And they're not going to try to change our plans. And they're not affected, meaning we're not doing it with our sisters, right? Or our mom or our husbands, right? But we're doing it with people who kind of have no skin in the game. How it works on page 60 says this: the point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means we're willing to grow towards our ideals. That spiritual lines are the ways that we live our lives with a new set of ideals. In how it works on page 69, it says, whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow towards it. So in step 5, we have to have the willingness to allow another person to know our story entirely, to hear it all, and to listen to feedback and take the suggestions and take the directions. I say, I had to stop trying to seem better than I believed myself to be. I had to stop faking it so that I looked better than I really thought I even was. No more being the public relations director for Melissa. No more PR for me. And then I had to sit there and really listen to constructive feedback, willing to have God mold my ideals and willing to grow towards it. And, I think about that molding my ideals. If something is being molded, there's like a little bit of a pressure. It's a little bit of a push with it. You could feel, I know that I'm growing, that my ideals, that it's being molded, that I'm growing towards it when there's a little discomfort. Not terrible, like I'm breathing, wrathing on the floor in pain. But when when I'm growing, it means I'm often outgrowing something. And there's a little bit of that discomfort as I'm letting go of the way I used to be, letting go of the way I used to do things. You know, a common kind of thing that I've heard people, and I know I've done it myself, is, yeah, no, that just wouldn't work for me. That's like, that's not really how I am. That's not, I usually do it like this. I usually, well, we have to be willing to say, yeah, no, it might have to work for you now, right? You may actually have to do things that seem foreign and uncomfortable. I mean, for me, it was in the very beginning, it was like, you want me to weigh my food? You want me to write it down? No, that won't work for me. I'm far too spontaneous a person. You know, that was like the disease in my head telling me that I actually ate because I was, free and spontaneous. There was nothing spontaneous about the way I ate. Food owned me. It just let me think that I was making that decision. And I think that's often the way that I was living my life too. Fear owned me, right? My selfishness owned me. My pride owned me. All those things had me under lock and key. And so being willing to do something different, to try things differently. I had to be, um, step 6 says this: if we can answer to our satisfaction, then we look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. So step 6 is a willingness to give it a go, to try it. And step 7 is a willingness to ask God to help us. So when we're ready, we say something like this: my creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me. All right, willingness to let God have us all, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. So willing to do God's bidding, to do the work that I think God wants me to do. Willing to let God have all of me, good and bad. Let God tell me what characteristics he's going to be rid of and which ones he's going to keep and repurpose, right? Willing to keep my attention on my own character defects and not criticize others for their shortcomings. In step 7, willingness to ask God to remove my defects. And in the chapter to wives, it says this on page 118. If you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, there will be little chance to criticize. There'll be little need to criticize each other. So I'm willing to ask God to help me keep my eye on my own problems and not on the problems of my spouse, right? My job is not to criticize. My job is to improve and have God improve me. Steps 8 and 9. What do I need willingness for here? Well, oh boy. Willing to clean up the wreckage of our past. That's a big one. In Bill's story, page 13, I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrongs. And into action on page 79, it says, we may lose our position, our reputation, or face jail, but we are willing. That's willing to go to any length, right? And in how it works on page 67, we admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. We're willing, page 70, to straighten out our past if we can. We make a list of all persons we'd harmed, and we became willing to make amends to them all, even the people we didn't like, right? I always say that, even the ones you don't like. Um, and in how it works, it says we must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we don't bring more harm in so doing. So we're willing to do what we believe God would have us do, to make restitution, to seek integrity above reputation, even willing to risk our own personal comforts and freedoms. That's true willingness. And step 10, well, I'm willing to continue to watch for my defects and keep my channel clear, to consistently inventory, consistently turn towards God. Which means for me, like, what does that look like? It means sometimes in the middle of me doing something, I'm willing to stop what I'm doing and change, do the about face, and do the opposite. It means sometimes I'm willing to walk away. I'm willing to live an examined life. And step 11 is one of my favorites, willing to pray and meditate, willing to seek God. And, I love, if you want reassurance, if you're struggling with prayer and meditation and you want some like comforting reassurance, well, I'm going to tell you this. This is one of my favorite things. It's in the AA 12 and 12. It's on page 97. And it talks about, it's encouraging for people who are struggling with prayer and meditation. It says this: those of us who have come to make regular use of prayer would do no more without it than we would refuse air, food, or sunshine, right? And that before that, it says, almost the only scoffers at prayer are those who never tried it enough. So you've got to be willing to try it enough. How do you know if you've tried it enough? Someone says, well, how long do I have to keep praying every day? Until you want to, until it becomes a natural working of your life. It's sort of the same thing when people say, well, how long do I have to do those outreach calls? I don't know. I don't count my outreach calls anymore. They're a part of the structure of my life. I want to. How long do you have to keep doing it? Until you no longer feel like you have to keep doing it, right? Until you've had a change of heart. Okay, so step 12. What do you have to be willing to do? Willing to work with others, to work day and night. It says to be inconvenienced, to offer care. And in A Vision for You, page 159 says this: they were willing, day or night, to place a new man in the hospital and visit him afterward, to tell our stories and specifically our mistakes in an honest desire to be helpful to those who still suffer, right? That's part of what we do. When we place a new man in the hospital, right? We don't place new men in the hospital. But what does that look like for us? It means we work with people as they're doing the best that they can to put the food down. We're helping them. We're willing to work with people who eat up our time, who call us crying, who tell us they ate again, and we give them care and direction and guidance. We're willing to do that. And what do? We tell our stories. We specifically are willing to share our mistakes in an honest desire to be helpful to those who still suffer. And in The Family Afterward, it says this: we think each family which has been relieved owes something to those which have not. I owe something to those who have not been relieved. And when the occasion requires, I am only too willing to bring my former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. Which means for me, part of my working with others, it means I have a very close relationship with humility. That I tell the people I'm working with where I fall down, where I fall short in this spiritual work, right? And I'm willing to build a fellowship, to find a sufficient substitute for the food. So I need to be willing to stop seeing food as entertainment and leisure and to seek human connection through the steps and through the fellowship. We have to be willing to pour into others, to be a we and not a me. And with that, I will stop.